I watched my 17-year-old daughter Emma storm into the living room, her face flushed with anger, followed closely by her younger brother Jake, who was clutching his phone like evidence in a court case. "Mom, we need to talk about Derek," Emma announced, her voice carrying that particular tone teenagers use when they think adults are being impossibly stupid. That's when I realized my children were about to destroy the first real relationship I'd had since their father died 3 years ago, and I was about to discover they were absolutely right. Just not in the way any of us expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Martinez, and at 42, I thought I'd figured out most of life's curveballs. I had survived my husband Michael's sudden heart attack when he was only 39, navigated single motherhood while keeping our small accounting firm afloat, and managed to raise two kids who, despite their current dramatics, had turned out to be pretty incredible human beings. Emma was a senior in high school, captain of the debate team, and had already been accepted to 3 universities. Jake, at 15, was quieter but brilliant, the kind of kid who could fix any computer problem and somehow always knew when I needed an extra hug. After Michael died, I threw myself completely into work and parenting. The idea of dating again felt impossible, like betraying his memory and risking the stability I'd worked so hard to create for my children. My friends tried to set me up a few times, but I always found excuses. The kids needed me. The business required attention. I wasn't ready. All true statements, but also convenient shields against the terrifying possibility of opening my heart again only to have it shattered. Then, Derek Sterling walked into my office on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, and everything I thought I know about my carefully controlled life shifted. He was 45, recently divorced, with warm brown eyes and the kind of smile that made me forget I was supposed to be professional. He needed help reorganizing his finances after his divorce, he explained, and a friend had recommended Martina's Financial Services. As we went through his paperwork, he made me laugh for the first time in months, sharing stories about his failed attempts at cooking for himself and his 8-year-old golden retriever, Buster, who apparently had strong opinions about Derek's choice in breakfast cereal. Derek was patient where Michael had been impulsive, thoughtful where my late husband had been spontaneous. He brought me coffee without being asked, remembered details about my day, and never made me feel guilty about the time I needed to spend with Emma and Jake. When he asked me to dinner after our third business meeting, I said yes before my practical brain could interfere. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, but Derek had called ahead to make sure they had vegetarian options because he'd remembered me mentioning that I'd been trying to eat less meat. We talked for 3 hours, the conversation flowing from childhood stories to career aspirations to the challenges of starting over in middle age. He told me about his own struggles after his divorce, how he'd had to rebuild his sense of self after a 20-year marriage ended. I shared my fears about raising teenagers alone, about keeping the business profitable, about whether I'd ever feel like myself again instead of just Michael's widow. When Derek walked me to my car that night, he didn't try to kiss me. Instead, he took my hand gently and said, "Sarah, I had such a wonderful time tonight. I hope you'll let me take you out again, but only if you're comfortable with that. I know this is all new, and I want you to set the pace." The consideration in his voice, the way he put my comfort first, made something tight in my chest finally relax. We dated slowly, carefully. Derek understood that my children came first, that I needed time to adjust to the idea of letting someone new into our lives. He never pressured me to introduce him to Emma and Jake, never complained when I had to cancel plans because of a school event or a sick kid. After 2 months of wonderful dates and long phone conversations, I finally felt ready to bring him into the part of my life that mattered most. The first family dinner was awkward, as I had expected. Emma was politely cold, answering Derek's questions with minimal responses while shooting me looks that clearly said, "How could you replace Dad?" Jake was more openly suspicious, studying Derek like he was solving a complex equation and not liking the results. Derek handled it beautifully. not trying too hard to win them over, respecting their need to process this change in their own time. They'll come around, Derek assured me as we cleaned dishes after he had helped me cook dinner. They're protecting you, which means they love you. I respect that, even if it makes things more challenging right now. Gradually, things did improve. Derek started showing up to Jake's soccer games, cheering from the sidelines without trying to replace their father's memory. He helped Emma practice for debate tournaments, asking thoughtful questions that sharpened her arguments. When Jake's computer crashed the night before a major school project was due, Derek stayed until midnight helping him recover the files, then drove across town to an all-night print shop to make sure everything was ready for the morning. By summer, 6 months after that first coffee meeting, Derek had become woven into our daily lives in ways that felt natural and right. He had a key to our house, his own coffee mug in our kitchen, and a standing invitation to our weekly pizza and movie nights. Emma had started asking his opinion about college choices, and Jake actually smiled when Derek made his terrible dad jokes. I was happier than I had been since Michael died, and I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved the second chance at love. Derek's job as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company required frequent travel, which actually worked well for our relationship. It gave me time alone with the kids to process this new chapter, and it made the time we spent together feel precious rather than overwhelming. He'd call every night when he was on the road, sometimes talking to me, sometimes to Emma and Jake, always interested in the details of our lives. In August, Derek asked if he could take me away for a weekend to celebrate the 6-month anniversary of our first date. Emma and Jake would be staying with my sister Lisa, something we'd done before, so it felt like perfect timing. Derek had found a small bed and breakfast in the mountains, a place where we could hike during the day and sit by the fireplace at night. On Saturday night, over dinner at the inn's restaurant, he reached across the table and took my hand. Sarah, I had such a wonderful time tonight. I hope you'll let me take you out again, but only if you're comfortable with that. I know this is all new, and I want you to set the pace. The consideration in his voice, the way he put my comfort first, made something tight in my chest finally relax. We dated slowly, carefully. Derek understood that my children came first, that I needed time to adjust to the idea of letting someone new into our lives. He never pressured me to introduce him to Emma and Jake, never complained when I had to cancel plans because of a school event or a sick kid. After 2 months of wonderful dates and long phone conversations, I finally felt ready to bring him into the part of my life that mattered most. The first family dinner was awkward, as I'd expected. Emma was politely cold, answering Derek's questions with minimal responses, while shooting me looks that clearly said, "How could you replace Dad?" Jake was more openly suspicious, studying Derek like he was solving a complex equation and not liking the results. Derek handled it beautifully, not trying too hard to win them over, respecting their need to process this change in their own time. They'll come around, Derek assured me as we cleaned dishes after he had helped me cook dinner. They're protecting you, which means they love you. I respect that, even if it makes things more challenging right now. Gradually, things did improve. Derek started showing up to Jake's soccer games, cheering from the sidelines without trying to replace their father's memory. He helped Emma practice for debate tournaments, asking thoughtful questions that sharpened her arguments. When Jake's computer crashed the night before a major school project was due, Derek stayed until midnight helping him recover the files, then drove across town to an all-night print shop to make sure everything was ready for the morning. By summer, 6 months after that first coffee meeting, Derek had become woven into our daily lives in ways that felt natural and right. He had a key to our house, his own coffee mug in our kitchen, and a standing invitation to our weekly pizza and movie nights. Emma had started asking his opinion about college choices, and Jake actually smiled when Derek made his terrible dad jokes. I was happier than I had been since Michael died, and I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved the second chance at love. Derek's job as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company required frequent travel, which actually worked well for our relationship. It gave me time alone with the kids to process this new chapter, and it made the time we spent together feel precious rather than overwhelming. He'd call every night when he was on the road, sometimes talking to me, sometimes to Emma and Jake, always interested in the details of our lives.
In August, Derek asked if he could take me away for a weekend to celebrate the 6-month anniversary of our first date. Emma and Jake would be staying with my sister Lisa, something we'd done before, so it felt like perfect timing. Derek had found a small bed and breakfast in the mountains, a place where we could hike during the day and sit by the fireplace at night. On Saturday night, over dinner at the inn's restaurant, he reached across the table and took my hand. Sarah, these past 6 months have been the happiest I've been in years. You and Emma and Jake, you have given me something I didn't think I'd ever have again. A family, a home. I love you, all three of you, and I want to be part of your lives as long as you'll have me. I felt tears spring to my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen not just as a woman, but as a mother, as someone whose children were part of the package deal. I love you too, I whispered, meaning it.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
That night, lying in Derek's arms in the cozy room with mountain air drifting through the open windows, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since before Michael's death. I was building something new, something that honored our past while embracing the future. Emma would be leaving for college in a year, Jake would follow eventually, and for the first time, I could imagine what my life might look like when it was no longer consumed by the immediate needs of parenting. The thought didn't terrify me anymore because I wouldn't be facing it alone. We drove home Sunday evening, Derek's hand resting on my knee as I navigated the winding mountain roads. He'd already started talking about Thanksgiving plans, asking if I thought the kids would be comfortable with him joining our traditional dinner with Lisa's family. The casual way he assumed he'd be part of our future holidays made my heart sing. I think they'd be disappointed if you weren't there, I told him honestly. Emma had started setting 4 places at the dinner table without being asked, and Jake had begun including Derek in his end-of-day summaries about school and friends. When we pulled into my driveway, I could see lights on throughout the house, which was unusual. Emma and Jake should have been back from Lisa's, but it was late enough that they'd normally be getting ready for bed. Derek carried my overnight bag to the front door, kissing me goodnight on the porch like he had after our very first date. "I'll call you tomorrow," he promised. "Maybe we can all go out for dinner this week to celebrate the start of the school year." I watched him drive away, then unlock the front door, expecting to find my children watching television or finishing homework. Instead, Emma was pacing in the living room while Jake sat hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, both of them looking like they'd been waiting for me to return. "How was your weekend, sweetheart?" I asked Emma, dropping my purse and keys on the hall table. "We need to talk about Derek," she said without preamble, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. Jake looked up from his computer screen, his young face serious in a way that reminded me painfully of his father. "Mom, we found some stuff while you were gone. About Derek. You need to see this." The happiness from our perfect weekend began to curdle in my stomach. What kind of stuff? Emma sat down heavily on the couch, suddenly looking much older than 17. "We were worried about you, Mom. Not because we don't want you to be happy, but because some things about Derek didn't add up. So we did some research." "Research?" I repeated, not liking where this was heading. Jake swiveled his laptop screen toward me. Social media deep dives, public records searches, reverse image searches on his photos. Mom, Derek Sterling doesn't exist the way he says he does. I stared at my children, these 2 people I'd raised to be thoughtful and intelligent, and felt the ground shifting beneath my feet for the second time in 3 years. "What do you mean he doesn't exist?" Emma pulled out a folder thick with printed papers. "His LinkedIn profile was created 8 months ago. His Facebook account is even newer. The divorce he told you about? We can't find any record of it. The medical equipment company he says he works for? They've never heard of him." My legs suddenly felt unsteady and I sank into the armchair across from them. "That's impossible. I've seen his business cards. He gets work calls. He travels for work." "The business cards are fake," Jake said quietly. "I called the number on one while you were gone. It goes to a voicemail service, the kind you can rent online for $20 a month."
Emma leaned forward, her expression gentle but determined. Mom, we're not trying to hurt you. We can see how happy you've been these past few months. But something is wrong with this picture, and we couldn't just sit by and watch without saying something. I stared at the folder in Emma's hands, afraid to look at whatever evidence they'd compiled, but knowing I had to. Show me, I whispered. The next hour was a blur of printouts, screenshots, and careful explanations delivered in my children's voices, which seemed to be coming from very far away. Derek's professional history was a fiction. The company website he'd shown me was elaborate but fake, created specifically to support his fabricated identity. His apartment, which I'd been to several times, was listed under a different name entirely. Even his last name appeared to be false. There's more, Jake said hesitantly. Emma found some news articles from other cities. Similar situations, a man matching Derek's description, using different names, targeting single mothers with kids about our age. Emma spread out 3 newspaper clippings on the coffee table.
Headlines about romance scams, financial fraud, identity theft. In each case, the victim was a widowed or divorced mother, financially stable, with teenage children. In each case, the man had vanished after months of careful relationship building, taking not just money but leaving behind shattered families and children who felt responsible for not protecting their mothers. I picked up the first article with shaking hands. The photograph was grainy, but I could see enough resemblance to make my stomach lurch. This says he took over $200,000 from this woman in Phoenix. She had to sell her house. And this one in Denver, Emma said softly, pointing to another clipping. $300,000. Her kids had to drop out of private school. The room was spinning. 6 months of careful courtship, of slowly building trust, of letting someone into our family's heart. 6 months of believing I'd found someone who understood the complexity of loving a widow with children, someone patient enough to earn his place in our lives rather than demanding it. Mom, are you okay? Jake asked, and I realized I was hyperventilating. I need air, I managed, stumbling toward the back door that led to our small garden. Emma and Jake followed me outside, where I sat heavily on the porch steps and tried to make sense of what I'd just learned. How long have you suspected? I asked, when I could finally speak without my voice shaking. A few weeks, Emma admitted. Little things that didn't add up, the way he never talked about his life before the divorce, how he always paid for everything in cash, the fact that his apartment doesn't have any personal photos or anything that seems really lived in. Jake sat down beside me. And his work travel schedule seemed weird, like he'd be gone for exactly the right amount of time to not be around when we might have questions or want to verify things. I've thought about all the times Derek had been conveniently absent when the kids had school events or family plans that might have put him in contact with other adults who knew our family well, how he'd never suggested meeting my friends or introducing me to his, the way he'd always steered conversations away from specific details about his past. The weekend getaway, I said suddenly. He planned it right when you two were going to be at Lisa's, when I'd be completely away from anyone who might have questions. Emma nodded grimly. We think he was getting ready to make his move, ask for money for some kind of emergency or investment opportunity. That's how it worked with the other women. I buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of my stupidity. I was supposed to be the adult, the one who protected my children from harm, and instead I'd invited a predator into our home, our lives, our hearts. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry I put you both in this position. I should have been more careful. I should have done background checks or something before I brought him around you. Mom, no, Jake said firmly. You didn't do anything wrong. You fell in love with someone who seemed wonderful. That's not your fault. Emma scooted closer and put her arm around my shoulders. And we're okay. We figured it out before anything really bad happened. The question is, what do we do now? I looked at my children, these remarkable people who had been looking out for me while I thought I was taking care of them. Emma with her sharp mind and fierce loyalty, Jake with his quiet intelligence and protective instincts. They'd seen through Derek's deception when I'd been completely blind to it. And they'd handled their investigation with maturity I wasn't sure I possessed at their age. We called the police, I said finally.
If he's done this before, if there are other victims, they need to know he's here. What about you? Emma asked gently. How are you feeling about all this? I considered the question carefully. The betrayal was devastating, knowing that every tender moment, every seemingly spontaneous gesture, every declaration of love had been calculated and false. But underneath the hurt was something unexpected. Gratitude. Gratitude that my children had been vigilant when I'd been vulnerable. Gratitude that Derek's plan, whatever it had been, was discovered before he could execute it. Gratitude that I raised kids who were brave enough to challenge me when they saw danger I couldn't see myself. I'm heartbroken, I said honestly, but I'm also incredibly proud of you both.
And relieved. If you're right about this, if Derek was planning to hurt our family, then you just saved us from something terrible. Jake's phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen. It's a text from Derek. He says he hopes you had a good time getting back and settling in, and he's looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. The casual tone of the message, so normal and affectionate, made my skin crawl now that I knew it was likely part of an elaborate performance. Don't respond, I said. We need to figure out our next steps carefully. We went back inside, and I made hot chocolate while Emma and Jake organized their research into chronological order. The evidence was overwhelming once you knew what to look for. Derek had constructed an entire false identity, complete with fake business documents, manufactured references, and carefully scripted stories designed to appeal to a widow seeking companionship. The most chilling part was how specifically targeted his approach had been. He hadn't just chosen me at random. My late husband's obituary had been in the newspaper 3 years ago, mentioning that he was survived by his wife Sarah and 2 children. My business information was publicly available online. Derek could have researched our family thoroughly before ever walking into my office, knowing exactly what kind of story would appeal to a single mother trying to balance grief, parenting, and professional responsibilities. The question is, Emma said, as we sat around the kitchen table with our research spread out like pieces of a puzzle, do we confront him directly or just report him to the police and let them handle it? I thought about Derek's kind eyes, his patient smile, the way he'd held my hand while we watched the sunset just 24 hours ago. Had any of it been real, or was he such a skilled actor that he could fake even the smallest moments of tenderness? I think we need to be smart about this, I said finally. If he's done this before, if he's as good at manipulation as these articles suggest, confronting him directly might just give him a chance to disappear before the police can investigate. Jake nodded. Plus, if you suddenly act suspicious or different, he might realize we're onto him and escalate whatever he was planning. The thought of having to pretend everything was normal, of smiling and acting affectionate with someone who had been systematically deceiving my family made me feel sick. But my children were right. If Derek was part of a larger pattern of fraud, other women needed to be protected, and that meant building a solid case rather than just making him disappear from our lives. Tomorrow I'll call Detective Rodriguez, I decided. Maria Rodriguez had handled the investigation when our house was broken into 2 years ago, and I trusted her to take this seriously. I'll also call Tom Chen at the bank and ask him to put alerts on all our accounts. Emma looked relieved. Good. And, Mom, until we know more, maybe you shouldn't be alone with Derek. Just in case. The idea that I might need protection from someone I'd been intimate with, someone I'd trusted with my children's well-being, was almost more than I could process. 6 hours ago, I'd been planning a future with Derek, imagining holidays and family vacations, and the gradual building of a blended life. Now I was strategizing about how to safely extract myself from what might be an elaborate criminal conspiracy. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through 6 months of memories, looking for clues I should have caught. Derek's reluctance to introduce me to his friends, the way he'd always been vague about his work schedule, his insistence on paying for everything, which I'd interpreted as old-fashioned chivalry, but might have been a way to avoid leaving paper trails that could be traced back to his real identity.
The hardest part was accepting that my judgment had been so completely wrong. After Michael died, I'd been so afraid of making a mistake that would hurt my children that I'd second-guessed every decision for months. When I finally felt ready to date again, I thought I was being careful and responsible by taking things slowly, by insisting that any man in my life earn his place gradually. Instead, I'd given Derek exactly what he needed: time to study our family dynamics, to understand our vulnerabilities, to craft the perfect approach for whatever endgame he had planned. My phone buzzed with a text message, and Derek's name appeared on the screen. "Sweet dreams, beautiful. Can't wait to hear about Emma's first day of senior year tomorrow. Love you." I stared at the message for a long time before turning off the phone without responding. The casual reference to Emma's school schedule, the easy assumption that he'd be part of our family's daily routine, the declaration of love that might never have been real, it all felt sinister now, like evidence in a case I was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow would bring phone calls to police and Danks, difficult conversations about protection and investigation. Tomorrow I'd have to start the process of untangling Derek from our lives while pretending everything was still normal. Tomorrow I'd have to figure out how to move forward as a family when our foundation of trust had been systematically undermined by someone we'd welcomed into our hearts. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to protect my children from the risks of dating after becoming a widow, I'd instead put them in the position of having to protect me. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, I realized that maybe that wasn't such a terrible thing. We were a family, and families looked out for each other. Sometimes the parents protected the children, and sometimes the children protected the parents. What mattered was that we were still intact, still together, still strong enough to face whatever came next. The sound of my alarm at 6:30 felt like a gunshot in the quiet house. For just a moment, in that hazy space between sleep and full consciousness, I forgot about the previous night's revelations. Then reality crashed back, and I remembered that today I would have to begin the complex process of protecting my family from someone we'd trusted completely. Emma was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, nursing a cup of coffee and looking like she'd slept about as well as I had. "Jake's still asleep," she reported.
I've been thinking about what we should do today. I poured myself coffee with hands that were steadier than I'd expected. Detective Rodriguez first, then the bank. What about Derek? He'll expect to hear from me. You should probably text him back normally, Emma said reluctantly. If he gets suspicious and disappears, the police might never catch him. The thought of pretending affection for Derek, even via text message, made my stomach turn. But Emma was right. If Derek was part of a pattern of fraud targeting vulnerable women, letting him escape would mean other families might suffer what we'd almost experienced. I sent a brief reply. Slept wonderfully. Hope you have a great day. Talk soon. The casual tone felt like another betrayal, this time of my own instincts. Detective Rodriguez agreed to meet me at 9 o'clock, and by 8:30, Emma and I were sitting in her office at the police station with our folder of evidence spread across her desk. Jake had wanted to come, but I'd insisted he'd go to school normally. There was no point in disrupting his routine until we knew more about what we were dealing with. "Mrs. Martinez," Detective Rodriguez said after reviewing our research, "your children did excellent investigative work. This man appears to be running a sophisticated long-term con, and you're fortunate they caught it when they did." "What happens next?" I asked. "We'll run his fingerprints if we can get them, check his description against other fraud cases, and start building a file. But I have to warn you, this type of criminal is often very careful about not leaving evidence that would support prosecution. Your best outcome might be that he simply disappears when he realizes he's been discovered." Emma leaned forward. "What about the other women in those newspaper articles? Have they been contacted about this?" "We'll reach out to those departments and see if they have active cases. If we can establish a pattern across state lines, the FBI might get involved." The idea that Derek might have hurt multiple families, that he might be part of something much larger than a single con artist targeting one vulnerable widow, was overwhelming.
But it also made me feel less stupid, less personally responsible for missing the warning signs. If Derek was sophisticated enough to fool multiple women across different states, perhaps my failure to see through his deception was understandable rather than inexcusable. In the meantime, Detective Rodriguez continued, you should be very careful about your interactions with him. Don't let him know you're suspicious, but don't put yourself in any situation where you're alone and vulnerable. And document everything. Save all text messages, emails, any communication you have with him. After the police station, Emma and I went to the bank, where Tom Chen, our financial advisor, set up fraud alerts on all our accounts and walked me through the process of protecting our assets. Sarah, I'm sorry this happened, he said as we reviewed account security measures. But you should know that nothing's been compromised so far. Whatever this man was planning, he hasn't executed it yet. That was some comfort, at least. Derek had been patient enough in his approach that he hadn't yet made whatever financial move he'd been building toward. We might have discovered his deception just in time to prevent serious damage. By the time Emma and I returned home, it was nearly noon, and I felt emotionally drained from the morning's activities. The house felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that Derek had been here so often under false pretenses. I found myself looking at the coffee mug he'd used, the chair where he'd sat to help Jake with homework, the couch where we'd watched movies together, and wondering how much of our life together had been genuine and how much had been performance. My phone buzzed with another text from Derek. Free for lunch today? I missed you last night and would love to see you. Emma read the message over my shoulder. Are you going to meet him? I thought about Detective Rodriguez's advice to act normally while being careful not to be alone with him. I don't think I can fake normal right now, I admitted. I'll tell him I'm busy with work today. Good call, Emma agreed. You need time to process all this before you have to see him face to face. Jake came home from school that afternoon full of questions about our morning meeting with the police. The three of us sat in the living room while I explained what Detective Rodriguez had told us about the investigation process and the likelihood that Derek was part of a larger pattern of fraud. So what happens if they arrest him? Jake asked. That depends on what evidence they can gather and whether they can connect him to other crimes. It's possible he'll just disappear when he realizes we're onto him. Emma frowned. That doesn't seem fair. He shouldn't just get to move on to the next family. I agreed, but I also knew that our first priority had to be protecting ourselves rather than ensuring Derek faced consequences for his actions. If making him disappear from our lives was the safest option, that might have to be enough.
Over the next few days, I maintained minimal contact with Derek while Detective Rodriguez worked on her investigation. I begged off our usual dinner plans, claiming work deadlines and family obligations. Derek was patient and understanding. Exactly the kind of response that would have made me feel grateful for his flexibility just a week earlier. Now it felt calculated, like he was giving me space precisely because pushing too hard might raise suspicions. On Thursday evening, Detective Rodriguez called with an update that made my blood run cold. We've confirmed connections to at least 3 other cases in different states, she reported. The man you know as Derek Sterling is actually David Brennan, age 47, wanted in connection with multiple fraud cases. The FBI is now involved, and they want to use your situation to try to apprehend him. Use our situation how? I asked, my voice barely steady. They want you to arrange a meeting with him, somewhere public and controlled, so they can make an arrest. You'd be completely safe, surrounded by undercover officers, but it would require you to continue pretending everything is normal until we can get him into custody. The thought of sitting across from Derek, knowing he was a wanted criminal who had been systematically manipulating my family for months while pretending to be the loving girlfriend he expected me to be, seemed impossible. But I thought about Emma's words. He shouldn't just get to move on to the next family. How many other women has he hurt? I asked. That we know of? At least 6, possibly more. Total financial losses exceed $2 million. And Mrs. Martinez, there's something else you should know.
In 2 of the previous cases, when the women became suspicious or resistant to his financial requests, he escalated to intimidation and threats against their children. My heart stopped. Threats against the children? Veiled at first, then more direct. In one case in Portland, he knew the daughter's school schedule, her after-school activities, details that suggested he'd been watching the family carefully. When the mother tried to end the relationship, he made it clear that her daughter's safety might depend on her cooperation. I sank onto the kitchen stool, legs suddenly unable to support me. Derek knew Emma and Jake's schedules. He'd been to their school events, their sports games. He had keys to our house. Detective Rodriguez, my children are safe, she said quickly. We have surveillance on your house and their schools, but this is why we need to end this quickly and cleanly. David Brennan is escalating his methods with each victim, and we can't risk him following that pattern with your family. Emma and Jake were in the living room doing homework, their voices drifting into the kitchen as they debated some point about Jake's history assignment. Normal sibling interaction, the kind of everyday moment that had made up the fabric of our life together. The idea that Derek might use them to manipulate me, might threaten their safety to ensure my compliance with whatever scheme he'd been building toward, made me feel physically ill. But it also crystallized my decision. Derek had made this personal when he'd targeted my children's trust and safety. He'd made it about protecting other families when I learned he'd done this before and would certainly do it again. This wasn't just about extracting him from our lives anymore. This was about stopping him. "What do you need me to do?" I asked Detective Rodriguez. The plan Detective Rodriguez outlined was both simple and terrifying. I would invite Derek to dinner at Romano's, the same Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date, on Saturday evening at 7 o'clock. The restaurant had already agreed to cooperate with the FBI, and undercover agents would be positioned throughout the dining room and surrounding area. When Derek arrived, I would simply act normal, order dinner, and make conversation until the agents received their signal to move in. "What kind of signal?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady during the phone briefing Friday morning. "Agent Patricia Vance will be seated at the bar, posing as someone waiting for a date. When you're ready for us to make the arrest, you'll excuse yourself to use the restroom and give her a nod. She'll coordinate with the team from there." It sounded straightforward, but the reality of sitting across from Derek while knowing he was a wanted criminal, while pretending to be the loving girlfriend he expected me to be, felt overwhelming. Every instinct I developed as a mother told me to keep my children as far from danger as possible, but this plan required me to walk directly into it. Emma found me sitting at the kitchen table that afternoon, staring at my phone and trying to compose the dinner invitation to Derek. "You don't have to do this, Mom," she said softly, sitting down beside me. "The police will catch him eventually, even if he leaves town." I looked at my daughter, so mature and thoughtful at 17, already accepted to college and preparing to leave home in less than a year. What if he doesn't just leave town? What if he finds another family like ours? Another single mother with kids, and we could have prevented it. Emma was quiet for a moment. But what if something goes wrong? What if he realizes it's a trap? That was the question that had been keeping me awake at night. Agent Vance had assured me that the operation would be completely controlled, that Derek would be surrounded by federal agents from the moment he walked into the restaurant.
But David Brennan, as I was learning to think of him, had evaded capture across multiple states for years. He was clearly intelligent, adaptable, and dangerous when cornered. "I keep thinking about what Detective Rodriguez said," I told Emma, "about the threats he made against children in other cities, about how he knew their school schedules and activities. He knows your debate tournament schedule, honey. He knows Jake's soccer practice times. If we just let him disappear and he decides we're a threat to him—" I didn't finish the sentence, but Emma understood. We were already in danger simply by knowing Derek's real identity. The question was whether we'd be safer helping the FBI catch him or hoping he'd leave quietly and never look back. Jake wandered into the kitchen, backpack slung over his shoulder, clearly just home from school. "Any news from the police?" he asked, dropping his bag by the back door. "They want Mom to help them arrest Derek," Emma said bluntly. "Tomorrow night at Romano's." Jake's face went pale. Is that safe? I pulled both my children closer, wrapping my arms around them in the kind of group hug we'd shared constantly in the months after Michael died. I don't know if it's safe, I admitted, but I don't think any of our options are completely safe now. At least this way, we have some control over when and where it happens. That evening, I finally composed the text message to Derek. Free for dinner tomorrow night? I was thinking Romano's at 7 for old time's sake. I've missed spending time with just you. His response came back within minutes. Perfect. Can't wait to see you, beautiful. I have something important I want to discuss with you. The phrase, something important, made my stomach drop. According to the FBI's profile, Derek's previous cons had typically climaxed with urgent requests for money, usually framed as investment opportunities or family emergencies that required immediate financial assistance. Had he been planning to make his move this weekend anyway, even without my invitation? I showed the message to Emma and Jake, who had insisted on being involved in every aspect of the planning, despite my attempts to protect them from the details. Something important, Emma repeated grimly. That sounds ominous. Or it could be innocent, Jake said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe that any more than I did. Maybe he was planning to talk about moving in together or something normal. The idea that Derek might have been preparing to suggest cohabitation to become even more integrated into our daily lives and routines was almost worse than the financial con. I thought about how patient he'd been, how he'd never pushed for more commitment than I was ready to give. Had that been genuine respect for my boundaries, or strategic planning to make his eventual request seem like a natural progression rather than a predatory demand? Saturday morning arrived gray and rainy, matching my mood perfectly. I went through my normal weekend routine, grocery shopping, laundry, helping Jake with a science project, but everything felt surreal, like I was playing a role in someone else's life. Emma made pancakes for breakfast, Jake mowed the lawn despite the drizzle, and we all pretended this was an ordinary Saturday rather than the day I would help federal agents arrest the man I'd been planning a future with just 1 week earlier. At 3 o'clock, Agent Vance arrived at our house for a final briefing. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with short blonde hair and the kind of calm, professional manner that I found reassuring. She wore jeans and a casual sweater, the kind of outfit that would blend perfectly into Romano's bar scene. Mrs. Martinez, I want you to know that this operation has been planned down to the minute, she said as we sat in the living room. We have agents positioned in the restaurant, in the parking lot, and on the surrounding streets. David Brennan will not be able to leave that building without us knowing about it. Emma sat beside me on the couch, taking notes like she was preparing for a debate tournament. What if he recognizes one of the agents? If he's done this before, he might know how police stings work. Agent Vance nodded approvingly. Good question. All of our people are experienced undercover operatives, and we have studied Brennan's previous patterns carefully. He's never shown awareness of surveillance in past cases, probably because he's been careful to avoid situations where law enforcement was actively looking for him. Jake looked up from his laptop, where he'd been researching everything he could about FBI arrest procedures. What happens after you catch him? Will he go to jail right away? He'll be processed and held pending arraignment. Given the charges across multiple states and the flight risk, it's likely he'll be held without bail. Mrs. Martinez, you should know that you'll probably be called to testify in his trial, assuming the case goes that far. The thought of facing Derek in a courtroom, of having to recount the details of our relationship while he sat at a defendant's table, was daunting, but not unexpected. If testifying would help ensure he faced consequences for what he'd done to other families, I was prepared to do it. At 5:30, I began getting ready for dinner, choosing clothes carefully. I wanted to look normal, like the Sarah that Derek expected to see, but I also wanted to wear something that made me feel strong and confident. I settled on a navy blue dress that Michael had always said brought out my eyes, paired with the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 10th anniversary. If I was going to confront the man who had been systematically deceiving my family, I wanted to carry some reminder of real love, of what a genuine relationship actually felt like. Emma knocked on my bedroom door as I was finishing my makeup. Mom, are you sure about this? I turned to look at my daughter, so poised and mature, and realized that somewhere in the past week she'd stopped being a teenager in my mind and had become a full partner in protecting our family. I'm terrified, I admitted, but I'm also angry, and I think the anger is stronger right now. Good, Emma said firmly. You should be angry. He tried to hurt us, and he's hurt other families. He deserves whatever happens to him tonight. At 6:15, I kissed both my children goodbye and drove toward Romano's through the early evening drizzle. Emma and Jake would be staying with my sister Lisa for the night, ostensibly for a normal sleepover, but actually because Agent Vance had recommended they not be alone at the house until Derek was in custody, just in case. The restaurant parking lot was busier than usual for a Saturday evening, which I supposed was intentional. More cars meant better cover for the various law enforcement vehicles that were supposedly positioned around the perimeter. I sat in my car for a few minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to summon the courage to walk inside and pretend to be excited about seeing my boyfriend. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Just pulling in. See you in a minute, gorgeous. I took a deep breath, checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror, and walked toward the restaurant entrance. The hostess, a young woman named Maria, whom I'd met several times during previous dinners with Derek, greeted me normally, but I thought I caught a flicker of something in her eyes that suggested she knew tonight was different. Your usual table? She asked. And I nodded, following her toward the corner booth where Derek and I had sat on our first date 6 months earlier. Derek was already there, standing to greet me with the warm smile and gentle kiss on the cheek that had become our standard hello. He looked exactly the same as he had a week ago, handsome and relaxed in a dark green sweater that I'd told him brought out his eyes. For just a moment, seeing him there in our familiar setting, I almost forgot that everything about him was a lie. You look beautiful, he said, helping me out of my coat with the same attentive courtesy he'd always shown. I've missed you this week. I've missed you too, I managed, sliding into the booth across from him. The words felt like ash in my mouth, but Derek's face lit up with genuine-seeming pleasure at hearing them. As we looked over our menus, making the kind of casual conversation we'd shared dozens of times before, I found myself scanning the restaurant for signs of the FBI agents who were supposedly watching our every move. A couple at a nearby table seemed to be paying more attention to us than to each other. The man at the bar could have been anyone, but he'd glanced our way several times. Agent Vance was seated on a bar stool with her back partially turned toward our table, nursing what looked like a glass of wine while checking her phone periodically. You seem a little distracted tonight, Derek observed as our server brought our drinks. Everything okay with the kids? The casual reference to Emma and Jake, spoken in the same caring tone Derek had always used when asking about their well-being, made my skin crawl now that I knew he might have been gathering intelligence about their schedules and vulnerabilities rather than expressing genuine interest. They're fine, I said, forcing a smile. Just the usual start of school year stress. Emma's got college applications to finish. Jake's adjusting to high school workload. Derek nodded sympathetically. I remember how overwhelming senior year was. Emma's so smart and driven, though. I'm sure she'll have her pick of schools. Had he always asked so many questions about my children's activities and plans? Or was I only noticing it now because I understood his real motives? Looking back over our 6 months together, I realized that Derek had been remarkably well informed about every aspect of our family life, from Emma's debate tournament schedule to Jake's soccer team playoffs to my business's busy season patterns. We ordered dinner, and Derek seemed more animated than usual, talking about a supposed work trip he had taken during the week and asking detailed questions about my recent client meetings. I answered automatically, part of my mind focused on maintaining normal conversation, while another part cataloged all the ways his questions probed for information about our family's routines and financial situation. Sarah, there's something I wanted to talk to you about, Derek said as our entrees arrived, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Here it was, the something important he'd mentioned in his text. I gripped my fork more tightly and tried to look curious rather than terrified. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our future together, Derek continued, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his, about what it would mean for us to take the next step as a couple.
Despite knowing that every word out of his mouth was likely calculated manipulation, I felt my heart rate increase. The warmth of his hand on mine, the sincerity in his voice, the way he was looking at me like I was the most important person in his world, it all felt so real that part of me wanted to forget everything Emma and Jake had discovered and just believe in this moment. Derek, I care about you so much, I said carefully, not sure how to respond without either seeming suspicious or encouraging whatever he was building toward. Derek, I care about you, Sarah. You and Emma and Jake, you've become my family in a way I never expected after my divorce. Derek's voice was soft, intimate, exactly the tone he'd used when telling me he loved me just a week earlier in that mountain cabin. Which is why I want to talk to you about something that could secure our future together. Here it was. I could see Agent Vance at the bar, apparently absorbed in her phone, but positioned so she could see our table clearly. The couple at the nearby table had finished their meal but were lingering over coffee, the woman occasionally glancing our way. Everything was in place for whatever Derek was about to propose.
I'm listening, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Derek smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that would have melted my heart under different circumstances. You know I work in medical equipment sales, and I've learned about investment opportunities that most people never hear about. There's a company that's developing revolutionary cardiac monitoring devices, still in the pre-IPO phase, but they're looking for private investors. He pulled out his phone and showed me what looked like a professional prospectus, complete with charts and projections and official-looking logos. The minimum investment is $50,000, but the potential returns are extraordinary. We're talking about getting in on the ground floor of technology that could change how heart disease is treated. $50,000, the same amount I'd been setting aside for Emma's college tuition. Money that Derek would have known about from casual conversations about our family's financial planning. The cardiac monitoring angle was particularly manipulative, targeting my lingering fears about heart problems after losing Michael to a sudden heart attack. It sounds interesting, I said slowly, trying to project the kind of cautious optimism Derek would expect from someone hearing about a legitimate investment opportunity. But $50,000 is a lot of money to invest in something I don't fully understand. Derek nodded earnestly. Of course it is, and I would never pressure you to make a decision this important quickly. But Sarah, this is the kind of opportunity that could set us up for life. Emma's college expenses, Jake's future education, our retirement, everything could be covered by the returns from this investment. The way he included my children's futures in his pitch was masterful, appealing to my deepest priorities while making the financial risk seem like responsible family planning rather than speculation with money we couldn't afford to lose. Can I think about it? I asked, playing the role of an interested but cautious potential investor. Absolutely, Derek said, his relief at my apparent receptiveness evident in his posture. But I should mention that the investment window closes next Friday. After that, the company moves to the next phase and private investment won't be possible. A 1-week deadline to make a major financial decision. Another classic high-pressure sales tactic designed to prevent the target from having time to research the opportunity thoroughly or seek outside advice. If I'd been the trusting girlfriend Derek expected me to be, I might have felt flattered that he'd thought to include me in such an exclusive opportunity, grateful that he was looking out for our family's financial future. Instead, I felt sick knowing that this conversation represented the culmination of 6 months of careful manipulation, that every tender moment and loving gesture had been building toward this request for access to my family's money. Derek, this is really thoughtful of you, I said, hoping my voice conveyed appreciation rather than revulsion. I'm touched that you want to help secure Emma and Jake's futures. His face brightened with what looked like genuine happiness. Sarah, those kids mean everything to me, almost as much as you do. I want to be part of your family for the long term, and that means thinking about all of our futures together. The server arrived to clear our plates and ask about dessert, giving me a moment to compose myself.
I could feel Agent Vance's attention from across the room, and I knew that Derek's investment pitch had been recorded by whatever surveillance equipment the FBI had in place. This was probably enough evidence to support fraud charges, assuming they could prove the cardiac monitoring company was as fake as Derek's identity. But I found myself curious about how far Derek would push this, how much of his real personality would emerge now that he thought he had me convinced. Against my better judgment, I decided to probe a little deeper. "I'm definitely interested," I told Derek as the server walked away. "But can you tell me more about how you learned about this opportunity? It sounds like the kind of thing that would be pretty exclusive." Derek's eyes lit up, clearly pleased that I was engaging seriously with his proposal. "Actually, it's through my business partner, Nathan. He's got connections in the medical technology field that go back years. We've been looking for the right investment opportunity for both our families." Nathan? Derek had mentioned a business partner a few times over the months, always in vague terms that I'd attributed to professional discretion. Now I wondered if Nathan was another fabricated character in Derek's elaborate fiction, or if there was actually a partner involved in these cons. "I'd love to meet Nathan sometime," I said casually, "especially if we're going to be making business decisions together." For just a fraction of a second, Derek's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. Then the warm smile returned. "Of course! Actually, Nathan's in town next week for some other business. Maybe the three of us could have dinner and he could answer any questions you might have about the technical aspects of the investment." It was smoothly handled, but I'd caught that moment of hesitation. Derek was either improvising around a fictional partner, or Nathan was real but not available for the kind of casual dinner meeting that would allow for real scrutiny. "That sounds perfect," I said. "I always feel more comfortable making big decisions when I can talk to everyone involved." We ordered coffee and dessert, and Derek began sharing what he presented as insider details about the cardiac monitoring company's development timeline and market projections. He was impressively well prepared, with statistics and technical specifications that sounded plausible to someone without medical device expertise. If I'd known he was a con artist, I might have been convinced by the apparent depth of his knowledge. As Derek talked, I found myself studying his face, looking for signs of the calculating predator underneath the caring boyfriend persona. His enthusiasm seemed genuine, his concern for our family's financial future appeared heartfelt, and his knowledge of the investment opportunity was detailed enough to suggest significant research. If he was acting, he was extraordinarily skilled at it. The most disturbing part was realizing how easily I could have fallen for this pitch under different circumstances. Derek knew exactly which emotional buttons to push, how to frame financial risk as family responsibility, and how to make a rushed decision seem like smart family planning rather than speculation with money we couldn't afford to lose.
"Sarah, I want you to know how much tonight has meant to me," Derek said as we finished our coffee. "Being able to share this opportunity with you, to plan for our future together, it feels like the next step in our relationship." He was leaning forward slightly, his voice intimate and warm, one hand resting on the table near mine. To anyone watching, we would have looked like a couple having a romantic dinner, sharing dreams and making plans. The performance was flawless. "I feel the same way," I lied, the words sticking in my throat. Derek smiled and signaled for the check, just as he had on dozens of previous dinner dates. As he pulled out his wallet, I realized this was the moment I needed to excuse myself and give Agent Vance the signal to move in. In a few minutes, this elaborate charade would be over, Derek would be in handcuffs, and I'd never have to pretend to care about him again. But as I started to slide out of the booth, Derek caught my hand gently. "Sarah, before we go, there's one more thing I wanted to mention." I froze, wondering if he'd somehow realized this was a trap, if he was about to reveal that he'd known all along what Emma and Jake had discovered. "I know the investment timeline is tight," Derek said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of my hand. "But I also know that kind of money represents a big commitment for your family. If you're not comfortable with the full $50,000, I could cover part of it myself. Say I put in $30,000 and you contribute $20,000. That way you'd still get the returns, but the risk would be more manageable." The offer to contribute his own money to the investment was a new twist, one that made Derek's pitch seem more like a partnership than a straightforward con.
but I realized it was probably another manipulation tactic, designed to make his request seem less like asking for money and more like including me in a mutually beneficial opportunity. That's incredibly generous, I managed, trying to sound touched rather than horrified by this final manipulation. Sarah, I love you, Derek said simply. Your happiness and security mean everything to me. If this investment works out the way I think it will, Emma and Jake will have their college expenses covered, you'll be able to expand your business without worry, and we'll have the foundation for a real future together. The casual way he wove my children's welfare into his declaration of love was the last straw. I couldn't sit here for another minute listening to Derek use Emma and Jake's futures as leverage for his con game. "Excuse me for just a minute," I said, standing up from the booth. "I'll be right back." I walked toward the restroom area, my legs feeling unsteady, but my resolve finally clear. Agent Vance was still at the bar, apparently engrossed in her phone. As I passed her table, I caught her eye and gave the slightest nod. She didn't acknowledge the signal overtly, but I saw her straighten slightly and touch something at her ear that might have been a communication device. I continued into the restroom, locked the door, and stood gripping the sink counter while I tried to process what was about to happen. In the next few minutes, Derek would be arrested, our 6-month relationship would be revealed as an elaborate criminal conspiracy, and I'd have to figure out how to explain to Emma and Jake that their instincts had been right, that the man we'd welcomed into our family had been planning to destroy us from the beginning. But as I stared at my reflection in the restroom mirror, I also felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in a week, I didn't have to pretend to feel something I didn't have to smile and act loving towards someone who saw my children as tools for manipulation. In a few minutes, this nightmare would be over, and we could begin the process of healing from Derek's betrayal. I splashed cold water on my face, took a deep breath, and opened the restroom door to face whatever came next. When I returned to our table, Derek was signing the credit card receipt, looking relaxed and content. He glanced up with that familiar warm smile, completely unaware that federal agents were closing in around him. "Ready to head out?" he asked, standing to help me with my coat. "Actually, let's finish our wine first," I said, sitting back down. I needed to keep him at the table until the agents were in position. Derek looked mildly surprised, but settled back into the booth. "Of course, no rush." That's when I saw Agent Vance stand up from the bar and walk casually toward the restroom area. 2 men in casual clothes rose from different tables and began moving through the dining room. The couple who'd been lingering over coffee suddenly became much more alert. Derek was telling me about his plans for the following week when 3 agents appeared at our table simultaneously. Agent Vance showed her badge, while the 2 men flanked either side of the booth. "David Brennan, FBI, you're under arrest." Derek's face went completely blank for a moment. Then his eyes darted to me with a look of pure rage. "You," he whispered, and in that single word I heard the real Derek for the first time, cold and vicious. "Sir, place your hands on the table," Agent Vance commanded as the other agents moved into position. Derek complied mechanically, but his eyes never left my face. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The transformation in Derek was complete and terrifying. The warm, caring boyfriend had vanished entirely, replaced by someone whose calculating stare made my skin crawl. This was the predator who had targeted my family, who had threatened other women's children when they resisted his schemes. "You have no idea what you've just done," Derek said as Agent Vance cuffed his hands behind his back. "Sarah, you have no idea who you're dealing with." Agent Vance pulled Derek to his feet. "David Brennan, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy."
You have the right to remain silent. As they led Derek away, other diners in the restaurant watched in stunned silence. The romantic atmosphere of Romano's had been shattered by the reality of handcuffs and federal agents, but I felt nothing but relief watching Derek disappear through the restaurant's front door. Agent Vance returned to the table a few minutes later. "Are you all right, Mrs. Martinez?" I realized I was shaking. "Is it over?" "The arrest is complete, but we'll need you to come to the field office tomorrow to give a formal statement. And, Mrs. Martinez, you did incredibly well tonight. That conversation gave us everything we need to connect Brennan to multiple fraud cases across 4 states." Driving home through the dark streets, I felt like I was emerging from a months-long nightmare. Derek was in federal custody, my children were safe, and our family's financial security was intact. But I also knew that the emotional healing would take much longer than the legal resolution. Emma and Jake were waiting for me at Lisa's house, both of them jumping up from the couch when I walked in. "Did they get him?" Emma asked immediately. "They got him," I confirmed, and both kids wrapped me in a fierce group hug. Jake pulled back to look at me seriously. "Are you okay, Mom? Really okay?" I thought about the question carefully. Was I okay? I'd spent 6 months falling in love with someone who didn't exist, who had been systematically planning to destroy my family's financial security and emotional well-being. I'd had to pretend affection for a criminal while federal agents recorded our conversation. I'd discovered that my judgment could be catastrophically wrong about someone I'd trusted with my children's safety. But I was also surrounded by two remarkable kids who had protected me when I couldn't protect myself, who had been brave enough to challenge my choices when they saw danger I was blind to. Our family had survived an attack we didn't even know was happening, and we'd emerged stronger and more united than before. "I'm going to be okay," I told Jake. "We all are." The trial took place 8 months later. Derek, whose real name was indeed David Brennan, pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was connected to cons in 6 different states, with total victim losses exceeding $3 million. The cardiac monitoring investment company had been completely fabricated, part of an elaborate scheme involving fake websites, forged documents, and rented office space. I testified about our relationship and the investment pitch, describing how Brennan had targeted my family's vulnerabilities and used my children's futures as leverage for his financial con. Sitting in that courtroom, looking at the man who had shared my bed and my dinner table while planning to rob us blind, I felt a mixture of disgust and pity. During his sentencing hearing, Brennan was given 12 years in federal prison. As the judge read the sentence, I thought about all the families he wouldn't be able to hurt during those 12 years, all the single mothers and their children who would be safe from his particular brand of predation. Emma graduated valedictorian that spring and left for college in the fall. Jake thrived in high school, his confidence boosted by the knowledge that he'd helped save our family from financial ruin. I expanded Martinez Financial Services using the experience with Brennan to develop workshops about financial fraud awareness for other single parents. 6 months after the trial, I started dating again, very carefully, and with Emma and Jake's full involvement in the vetting process. When I met Robert Chen, a widowed teacher whose background checked out completely under my children's thorough investigation, they gave him their cautious approval. "He seems genuine, Mom," Emma said after Robert's 3rd family dinner with us, "but we're watching him." I laughed, realizing that my children would probably be protective of my romantic choices for the rest of their lives. After what we'd been through with Derek, I was grateful for their vigilance. Looking back now, 2 years later, I understand that my children were absolutely right when they warned me that Derek was using me. They just hadn't realized he was using all of us, planning a con that would have destroyed not just our bank accounts, but our ability to trust anyone again. The experience taught me that love makes us vulnerable, but it also taught me that family makes us strong. Emma and Jake saved me from David Brennan's scheme, but more importantly, they saved our family from the shame and isolation that could have followed if we'd discovered his betrayal too late. Sometimes protection comes from unexpected places. Sometimes the people we think we're taken care of are actually taking care of us. And sometimes the most important lesson isn't about avoiding predators, but about recognizing the love that's been surrounding us all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.